Hello, everyone. This is Cindy Grogan from Flexera. We're going to go ahead and begin our roundtable. I would like to introduce to you Bob Kelly, who's our Director of Product Management. He leads our strategy, our roadmap, and all of the enhancements that come in from your feedback. And we love to get that kind of feedback from you. Kieran also is working as a technical product manager. He will take us through some of the changes and some of the enhancements that we're looking at for some of the topics we're discussing today. Mike O'Connor, many of you have probably met Mike throughout your time of working with Flexera. He's our senior solution engineer and will provide a demo. And then finally, Jace will be our moderator today. He will be the one that will be looking at your questions as you brief them in, and then he will be asking the team at the end of our session when we have our Q&A today. So with that being said, I'd love to ask Bob to come up on stage and share with you today's session. Thank you.
So we said we'd answer any questions after in the community, and we didn't do it last time. So I'm gonna own that right away, that we have the questions from last time and we have not yet published them. So if you're frustrated you didn't get an answer, you can ask again, and you can trust that that Karen and I will make it a priority to take the questions from last time and this time and get those in community. And I'd also suggest that if you want an immediate answer, the most effective way to do that would be to just go into the forum and ask the question there directly, versus you know, if it's something that's not being addressed here. But as usual, we will try to make this mostly conversation. The topic that we decided to kick off with is package automation, and we'll try not to make it too product specific. If your questions take us in a product specific direction, we'll go there, but I'll try to keep it a little higher level so it's applicable to anyone. So automation, you know, why automate? It was kind of the first question I thought we should address. And there's others that complete the thought here, but first, why consider automation? And typically this is driven by a couple of things, one of them being volume. If you've got a very large number of packages you need to get through, then there's a certain amount of time that each one's going to take. And if you had taken the time previously to set up automation, then that large volume of packages should move a lot quicker and allow you to focus on the more difficult packages, maybe automating some of the more simplistic ones, which is very connected to speed. This can be two different things. Maybe you've got a huge number and volume's more important, or maybe you get a couple of packages a week and you just want to spend as little time on those as possible. So, speed obviously is a big benefit of automation, and consistency is another one, right? So if you set it up to wrap your package a certain way, or to inject a certain property, or to put it in a certain place with a certain naming convention, all these little things that you might do manually, particularly across a team of multiple people, you're gonna eventually make a mistake, or someone's not going to get it, or a new person comes on. So having these things automated or in a script of some kind is going to definitely help from a consistency perspective, and then just the efficiency of the team, right? So I think one thing that comes up a lot when I talk about automation, I've done talks about some of the things we're doing in Admin Studio, and I've had people come to me after the session and say, oh my God, I'm glad my boss wasn't at this session, or he'd buy that new module and fire half the team. And that is definitely never the message that we want anybody to hear or think. There are things you can do to be more efficient, but the job of packaging cannot be fully automated. It just isn't possible. There's certain things that can be automated and you get these benefits to varying degrees, but it's always going to be a subset of the packages that you care about where you're able to take this kind of action. So takes me to why not automate. Certainly complexity is going to be a big one. If the package needs a bunch of manual things done to it that are just difficult or impossible to automate, then certain complex applications just don't lend themselves to automation, or maybe in order to lend themselves to automation, you'd have to do so much work that it's not worth the effort of setting it up in the first place. The availability of required details kind of comes, this is something that Karen and I deal with very closely, because we want to grow the package feed module that we have in Admin Studio as much as possible. But a key tenet is the installer publicly available so that we can monitor for it? Because that's the only way we can really see, is there a new version, get it, scan it, make sure the command lines still work, research it, validate it, and get it published for you. It really requires that first step of, it's got to be available so you can go find it. If it's gated behind a paywall or a login, it immediately becomes a lot more complicated. And that might take it out of the realm of the applications that we would automate as Admin Studio at Flexera. But you having that access, maybe you can still monitor those applications and have your own script seeing, has there been a change to this setup so that I know to go do something. Success rate could be a reason not to automate. If you try to automate 10, 15, 20 packages and enough of them give you trouble, then you may decide this isn't for you. And it depends on what you're trying to automate to really say how much trouble you're going to have, right? So if you're really just taking the vendor setup and wrapping it in PowerShell, like PowerShell deploy toolkit, and then publishing that to SCCM, that's pretty straightforward. That's a lot of people's process, and then the testing can happen after the fact. And so the more simple your process, the easier it's going to be to automate, the more success you'll have. And then we get back to the unrealistic goals. So it really, this is a summation of the ones above it. If it's complicated, you're really going to kill yourself to try to automate it. If it is, if you have very different types of packages with different requirements, then the time to spend getting automation working, may or may not be worth it. And that there's a lot of variables in that, including your own scripting abilities or the tools that you have available. We're obviously trying to make it as easy as possible with Admin Studio, but if you're rolling your own, then it can become quite complicated. And the number of applications that you can get this benefit from, is something that you have to factor. Is it worth the time you're going to get out of it? And so we get to what can be automated. We started with that. Like I said, if we're monitoring the existence of that setup file and the fact that it's changed, then awareness is a key thing that we can automate, which is really valuable, because especially if a lot of the updates that you're doing on a regular basis are due to security releases, almost every new release has security bug fixes in it. They could be of varying criticalities, and other Flexera solutions like Software Vulnerability Manager can help you prioritize those based on likelihood of exploitation or severity. But if you're just watching for a new application and trying to jump on anything that comes out, as automation allows you to do, then a key thing is awareness of a new version so that you can trigger that action automatically and not necessarily wait for somebody, product or an application owner in your company to come to you and say, hey, there's a new version that we need. You can just be on top of it for them and not rely on that. You can certainly automate repackaging. Most repackaging tools have some sort of automation control. Admin Studio has pretty extensive controls from the command line, from PowerShell commandlets, from the user interface itself. You can do things in bulk. You can, Karen posted a nice script in the community. You can see where we have a folder that is just has a scheduled task watching it, and whenever a new setup shows up in that folder, it takes it, wraps it, tests it, publishes it to SCCM all automatically. So your script could just put a file in that folder and then use Karen's script to take it the rest of the way. Testing, I think, well, what do you mean testing? How do you automate testing? It depends on what type of testing, right? So if the test is this likely to run on the target operating system? Does it conflict with other applications in my environment? Does it contain an end-of-life version of Java? These are some of the things that Admin Studio can automatically identify and in many cases fix. So that type of testing can be automated if you have the right tools. In some cases, you're talking about functional testing. Okay, so I created a package. It seems to silently install. I see the shortcut on the desktop. Does it work? How do I know I can take it to the next step without taking time to look at it? And you kind of can't. So you could rely on the exit code for the silent installation. If it's a 0, then it should be there. You could have a script look. Is the executable where I expect it to be? Is the shortcut where I expect it to be? You could have it automatically launch and get the return code from that. But to really automate functional testing is going to be something that you probably need to invest in tools for, or get really good with AutoIt or something. In many cases, what I see is people will take their package through the process without the functional testing. Maybe they'll do that upfront testing. We actually recommend in many cases that you do the upfront testing as part of the process, but then don't make decisions based on it. Use it as something you can fall back to if something goes wrong. And then you go, oh, there was this problem. But because it happens so infrequently, I don't want it to slow down my process. But the actual functional testing happens when you push it to a pilot group of users and they play with it. They tell you, does it work the way it's supposed to? Either people who own the application and know it well that you've identified, or a group of people who are just willing to subject themselves to the latest and greatest at the potential of suffering problems. One thing I'll tell you from experience is make sure that your pilot group aren't all people with admin access, because that can hide problems that you ultimately see when you deploy to regular users.
Testing is really, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say to Bob's point, a lot of customers we talk to, they like to do that whole functional testing of the application as well as the deployment. So they'll, publish that to their deployment system and have a test group. Admin Studio supports multiple deployment systems. So some organizations actually have a test system, versus production. I've talked to some that have a whole test SCCM and test machines and everything, and we could support that as well. We do also have the ability to just spin up VMs and just copy the package in question and run it with the command line options, right? No repackaging done. So just, if you want to just throw it on a test VM to do that functional kind of smoke test, you could do that as well.
So this testing is really tricky. I know when Bob and I are on call with customers, this is one question that really gets asked a lot. I know Mike could agree this. Along with the biggest amount of time that goes in actually packaging, this is the next biggest time. They keep saying we spend a lot of time on testing, and what can we do about it, right? Sorry for the background. So like Bob said, there are two things. One is testing against the OS operating system compatibility conflicts, which is of course there in Admin Studio. The second one is the functional one. And while Bob covered it all, but what we also try to recommend during these kind of discussions is, hey, maybe you can have a script written which does a part of functional testing, like you know when this package gets installed, where are the shortcuts getting created, where is your main executable file sitting. So you could write a quick script, and maybe you could use it as a post-install script that could be triggered, so you could achieve it as part of your publish and deployment. So this is one solution that we try to give, and that has worked in many cases.
Yeah, it depends on how far you want to go with the functional testing piece. Yeah, if you just want to check if things are where you expect them to be and there's no errors in the event log, then that's a great place to start. But you are almost certainly still going to have some actual functional testing with somebody that understands the product and can exercise it. When it's something like Google Chrome or Adobe Reader, you obviously don't need an expert to go troubleshoot or identify the success of that package for you. And those could be, because of the repetition of the releases for those types of products, you might want to take the extra effort to try to automate that testing as much as possible.
And that's where when I've talked about it, it's QA or quality assurance testing. What can the IT pro, right? That with the limited knowledge of what the actual application does, perhaps they don't have the back-end access to actually test everything, but they can at least, does it install, check the event logs, does there any errors, does the shortcut show up where I want to be? And then there's UAT or user acceptance testing, where absolutely deploy it to a test machine, let somebody who's familiar with, say, this tax software or engineering software or whatever it may be, let them put it through its paces, and then they sign off and say, yes, all the functionality works, it behaves the way I expect it to, I can do everything I need it to do, and then it passes that, and then it's ready for deployment.
Yeah. So publishing is another one. You know, Admin Studio, we of course have this built in to publish it to a lot of deployment systems, but when we do that, we're typically leveraging APIs and support of those vendor products. So if you wanted to write your own script that would finish by publishing the application to Intune or SCCM, you know, it's possible. You just have to go through the documentation and figure it out. Maybe you can find examples online and so forth. And then deployment, you know, again, from an Admin Studio point of view, we call it done at publishing, but you could certainly also automate the deployment with certain tools, SCCM being a very popular one. Configman can have automated deployment rules where you go in and you set these ADRs to say, if a new package shows up, I want it to go to these 10 systems, this collection, and then in another 3 days to a bigger group, and then another 5 days to an even bigger group. And you can have that automation in place, which basically gives you the opportunity to stop it if there's a problem. But if there is no problem, if you're not hearing any noise, then you let it naturally grow and make its way out with the least amount of you know, direct interaction. Yeah, so from an Admin Studio perspective, we've got PowerShell commandlets for pretty much everything that Admin Studio does available in the Enterprise Edition. So from a scripting and automation standpoint, there's obviously a lot in the product, especially with the latest release. I'll share these links in the email we send after the event, but we've got package automation kind of built into the product now. So you can provide an inventory of products. We'll look those up in our database, and we can fully automate the detection, the download, the testing, wrapping or repackaging, and then publishing all out of the box without having to script at all. But prior to that, we did post some scripts in the community that show how you can do that with PowerShell commandlets, and maybe that gives you more control or does something additional that you want done. But the other thing is bulk processing. So in you can select 50 packages and say, you know, repackage these in a virtual machine, or deploy these all to SCCM in bulk, and that's certainly a form of automation. You're clicking something there probably to kick it off, but then maybe going home for the weekend and coming back and seeing the results when it's done. So I said this wasn't going to be an Admin Studio session, but you know we can't help ourselves, and we just had a release, so I wanted to show you real quick what's in the new release that we just put out. So we've got you know, support for more new versions of Windows and the app deploy toolkit, where we're checking more Java versions now. We can help you detect which packages contain Java, which ones rely on Java, and if those versions of Java are end of life or not. The biggest, most interesting thing is we've finally introduced our Msix editor to general availability. It's now part of the product, where we have a dedicated editor just for Msix, and it can create modification packages very easily. It can sign your packages. It can trace your packages. It's a great starting point for a really groundbreaking editor that we're going to continue to do interesting things with over time. We do some checks for MSIX conversion compatibility, where we tell you, is this application a good candidate for MSIX or not? We added some more rules to enhance our capability there. Our automation feature was new, so naturally new stuff needs enhancements, and we take feedback and try to make it better. So there's a bunch of other kind of random stuff thrown in there that I won't dig into in this setting, but know that it's out there, it's documented on the community, and if you have it available to you, I encourage you to grab it. And then the obligatory community request. We've got all kinds of great stuff in community, articles, videos, training materials, lots of videos that we're doing all the time, including events like this one. We got these as well. So please come participate there. And a little longer than I would have liked, but we're ready for questions. Yes, Yasmin, what we got?
It's a good one straight away, actually, Bob. Just on the back of that slide, it was regards to MSIX, actually. A question came in as to, I managed to avoid AppV most of my packaging career, but recently started to look at it again. But now that MSIX is on the horizon, should I just invest my time in MSIX? Over to you, Bob.
Good question. I like that one. And it's a tough one. I know Microsoft's position was, don't change anything that you're doing. You know, if you're invested in AppV, don't worry, it's not going anywhere. You don't have to rip and replace anything. But that was a year ago. And now MSIX is, you know, more and more mature. It has many of the similar benefits, I think, that that make it compelling, the containerization, and so forth. So, I mean, I think I would recommend giving MSIX a good look and seeing it. Probably depends on your applications. You know, if you have a set of applications you're looking at, then, you know, run the suitability test against it and see, you know, what percentage of them are likely to give you trouble. Because there probably will be, in any big set of applications, there'll be some that MSIX will give you trouble, but there'll be some that AppV would give you trouble as well. So, you know, neither technology is perfect for every situation, but MSIX is pretty strong. It's definitely the future. And I think if I was getting started, I'd probably want to start with MSIX today, but I'm sure there's plenty of people who would have a different opinion and maybe some reasons around it. So if anybody, you know, cares to share, please do so in the chat. Mike, Karen, opinions on this?
Yeah, I think that was my point, that in case you have already invested enough in the AppV infrastructure, you know, it needs its own infrastructure. You will have to have the AppV client, and maybe for deployments, you might want to have AppV server. So if you have all that set up already, and if you're already invested, you might want to continue using AppV. Like Bob said, you know, in our discussions with Microsoft, they said they are going to continue AppV for a pretty long time, while they didn't set a date for it. But if you're starting it all fresh, and this is your first direction towards getting away from MSI or EXEs and getting into the virtual applications, then I would recommend start with MSIX. That is the future.
And I'd say it depends on the application too, and where you want to use it. So to Kieran and Bob's point, right, for AppV, there's additional infrastructure that if you haven't invested in, then in and of itself, it's probably not something you'd want to go in. But I know, like, AppV was very useful with VDI, you know, virtual desktops, and where they would, you know, you could stream an application on demand. Microsoft's adding something to Azure about, you know, app attach, where you can mount MSIX packages directly to it. So if you're in Azure and you're hosting it there, then MSIX would have a specific scenario for that. If you're leveraging Citrix or some other you know, VDI infrastructure internally, and it makes sense to keep those images light and, you know, on demand, the user demand, stream those applications in, then AppV is suited for that. So yeah, kind of in general, I guess I'd say MSIX, right, would be if you haven't invested anything in AppV yet, but there are probably some scenarios where AppV, at least at this moment in time, may work better than MSIX for those specific scenarios.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And But in either case, I think you do yourself a disservice if you say, I'm standardizing on this and everything is going to be this way. I mean, that's how a lot of people started off with MSI, right? I'm going to repackage everything to an MSI because I want to completely own every setup, and the industry's moved much more towards wrapping vendor setups that can do the silent installation, and maybe you have a script that does the customization if the command line doesn't support the customization you need. But there's still plenty of people who, you know what, I don't want to analyze the application and exactly what needs to be changed in order to customize it. If I can just repackage it, make the change, capture it, done. I don't have to worry about exactly how does it work and what needs to be tweaked in a script, which again requires, a different skill set to be able to pull those scripts off sometimes. So, whether you choose AppV or MSIX, there'll probably be cases where you still want to repackage it to an MSI, or you still want to use the vendor setup and script the changes that you'd otherwise want to include. So, I think it's a good idea to say, hey, we're leading with this new technology. Maybe that's MSIX, and then if the MSIX fails or gives me trouble, I'm going to repackage it as an MSI. Or if it's already an MSI, I'll just use the MSI. I think that would be a good, kind of plan A, plan B approach.
Okay, and just one other one following on from that team was whether there's any restriction on MSIX conversion from AppV, Windows Win32, or AppX.
You want to take that one, Kieran?
Yes. Well, Admin Studio is the first answer for that. So in Admin Studio, we have a test category which would look into your MSIs or EXEs or Win32 apps and look for all those restrictions which could determine if it's a good candidate or a bad candidate for conversions. I can name a few right away, like, for example, having device drivers, which is not supported in MSIX, and one is, and the other thing is about the elevations. MSIX is always installed in the user context. So if there is MSI package or a Win32 app which needs elevations, then maybe that's not a good candidate for MSIX conversions. And .NET, right? So there is a minimum version of .NET that your Win32 has to be built on to be converted to MSIX. If it's below that version, then that's not a good candidate as well. So there are many, but these are the few that are on top of my head. But yes, there are certain restrictions, and there are certain ways that you can get around. We would let you know, hey, if this is a problem, and if there is a way you can get around this problem. So yeah, to give a straight answer, there are restrictions. Some you cannot get around, like device drivers, but some you can.
And a lot of the restrictions are similar to what you'd experience in AppV, right? So yes. It really just comes down to this application, because of the technology it employs, has an issue with virtualization or containerization, then those, in many, those restrictions apply to both, like device drivers.
Right. And one simple one, which was pretty simple, is you need to have a shortcut inside your Win32 app, because that is the entry point for MSIX packages, and same is applicable for AppV and even AppX. Now, let's say you have some daemon kind of a product which doesn't have a shortcut, then that's not a good candidate for MSIX.
Cool. Good one.
One for actually as a market theme as a whole. A question's coming from Anonymous. Do you see the demand for packaging desktop applications going away with more customers looking towards a SaaS word? And how does Admin Studio help address this market need?
Yeah, that's I'm glad that one came up, because it seems like every 6 to 8 months I have to go on a rant about about the packaging market, and it's usually in defense of so many people that have dedicated this as their career, preparing applications for deployment is difficult, and the new technologies that aim to make it better introduce new complexities, and it takes people who specialize to really move the needle and keep organizations up to date. And whenever there's a new automation technology or anything, it always seems like, oh well, you don't need as many packagers as you used to, or you don't need to repackage anymore. Everything's an MSI or has command line support, so what do you need to package for? And I think the people on this call get the fact that there's a lot more to it than that. You don't just want the application installed, you want it installed the right way, customized the way you want, located where you want. Maybe you manage the shortcuts in a certain way. There's a bunch of extra work that goes into getting an application out there successfully. And the move towards SaaS is something that that rears its head pretty regularly. I think Office is a great example of an application that really kicks ass in the cloud. Like you can use Word and PowerPoint in a web page now, and maybe not even notice the difference at this stage. Like it's been getting incrementally better every couple of months, it seems like, and there's more options in there. But I still go and open in desktop mode most of the time because I like the full capabilities of the app, and that's an example of a great web app. So there's certain applications, certain things that are always well, I can't say always, but are going to be on the desktop for a very long time, either through that kind of hybrid approach that Office is taking, or how many applications in any given environment. I'll say how many applications do you manage? If it's more than 500, raise your hand, and everybody raises their hand. So forget the even bigger numbers. At 500 applications, those aren't all going to SaaS. Those aren't all going to be automatable. So while there are some cases where web apps can take over a certain area, or applications are simple enough that they can lend themselves well to automation, it's still going to be a relatively small percentage of the applications that you're responsible for. So I don't see in the near future any dramatic shift or change. And Mike mentioned Windows Virtual Desktop. That's not yet another approach to where an application's not really desktop but not really SaaS, but you can make it available. And guess what? As a packager, it's a whole new technology for you to consider how to manage and keep up to date and handle. So there's no end of challenges ahead for packagers and people that have made this their specialty, despite the fact that there's competing technologies and things happening that try to make it easier or try to streamline it or try to eliminate it. It's just not going to happen to a big enough percentage of the applications you care about to have a big impact anytime soon. What do you think, Mike?
I was going to say it's by industry too, right? Like, so I can think of one that probably won't go SaaS anytime soon is like healthcare, in the sense of all these specialty applications that like hospitals and clinics and other organizations that we talk to that have specific applications that interface with some specific device that runs in their clinic or their hospital. That's not going to go. You're not going to send that all the way to the cloud just to send it back down to interface with a machine standing right there. I think a lot of the back office stuff, like you said, Office can run in the cloud. Another a customer CRM system, right? A lot of those have moved to cloud-based things, but a lot of them also have local components to them. Like Office, there's a thick client. Things like OneDrive or a Dropbox or Box, they have a client, right? So there's a lot of times we're seeing as even if there's a SaaS and it's mostly in the cloud, there usually is some type of desktop component that at least makes it easier to interact with or more flexible than it would be if it was solely in the cloud. So I think it has impacted a bit on the packaging in general, where there's not as much in certain industries and certain places, maybe the volume has decreased a little bit. But to Bob's point, I think it's going to be a very long time before everything goes, 100% SaaS and there's no need for packaging. MSI was supposed to solve everything, where if everybody adopted MSI, we'd be creating some transform files and pushing everything out in 5 minutes. But still, people didn't adopt, MSIs uniformly, and even MSIX may take some time for it to really gain better adoption. So yeah, it really depends. But I don't. It's one of those. Oh, SaaS is here. Packaging's going away. No, I don't think that's going to go away for a long time.
Yeah,
I think it's applicable also to those heavy engineering applications, right? Like CAD, CAM, and all of those. Those are really heavy engineering applications. I don't imagine if they'll be going SaaS anytime soon, until the technology really evolves, which might definitely take a good amount of time.
Yeah, or you'll get a simple version of it in the cloud that you mostly go to the app for, as they kind of try to do a very slow transition. But yeah, it definitely depends on the application and as you said, on the industry as well, right? So some industries move very quick, like government, for example, incredibly slow. I mean, there's still Windows NT systems out there because the app that was written by the contractor that was let go 20 years ago, it's a critical app, and you get a new team to come in and try to make a SaaS version of it. That would be a way that you get out of that, but it all happens very slow and at scale with so many applications and so many industries. I think, yeah, I mean, you can expect the tail to be incredibly long. As it's not something not to think about or consider. It's a good point, but it's just something that's happening slowly. It really shouldn't be too big a concern, I would say.
Just thinking about it in my head, maybe it's a good analogy, maybe it isn't. It's kind of like, I think, when smartphones really started to take off and people say, well, there goes the PC. And there certainly has been a shift to more smartphones and tablets, but I think there was a record PC sales this last quarter because of work at home and so forth. So clearly, desktop and laptop computers of different varieties are still in heavy need and heavy use. So I think it's just going to be a hybrid model, right? Where, yeah, it makes sense to move some things to SaaS and have it solely host there. But if you need, there's still going to be a lot of use cases where locally installed applications and packages are needed, and thus packaging is needed as well.
I like that. Good analogy. What else you got for us, Yasmeet?
I see a good question here. Maybe Chase, if I can go.
Yeah, jump on.
So the question is, we repackage a lot of packages today. Do you think the entire repackaging process can be automated? And do you think it's a good idea to automate repackaging?
And your answer to that?
Well, yes, repackaging can be automated. I think we discussed briefly about what can be automated, and we definitely spoke about repackaging being one which can be automated. We have enough command lines. Nowadays the vendors offer a lot of command lines, which has definitely changed from over the years. So you could use all of those and repackage. Now, do you think it's a good idea to repackage? Well, in few cases where the exact behavior, the command lines work perfectly, and this is just a new version of the package that was there earlier. You already dealt with that package. Yes, go ahead. Please go ahead and automate it. But let's say this is the first time you're dealing with a package. I would say try it once manually just to make sure the behavior is all fine. The command lines are working all good. And once you have enough confidence on all the command lines, I think from the next new version, you take the approach of automating this package as well for repackaging. Now, this is where I think our package feed modules tested command lines would be really valuable, because those are already tested, those are all validated. So you could, right from the first version of the package, you could get started with automation.
And just to add to or to clarify if it needs to be, is repackaging is kind of a loaded word. So I think what you mean, Kieran, right, you mean specifically capturing that installer using for example, Admin Studio's repackager tool, capturing that information and turning that into an MSI if it's not already, right? Because some people use repackaging as a whole host of things. I like to lump it all into, I call it more application preparation, because you might just need to create a transform file, or you've got the installer, you've got the command line options, you don't need to do anything to it, right? It really comes down to, what do I do for all my packages? Well, it starts with what are you giving, right? What has the vendor provided you? If it's an MSI, it's got command line switches documented, it's easy to create a transform file for, that's one way. But if it's an executable, then you're kind of left with, all right, have they provided me command line switches? Do I have that enough information? And are those switches enough to run it silently? Because that's ultimately usually the goal, right? I want it installed, but I want it silent, and I want it pre-configured with all the settings, so the user doesn't really have to do anything other than launch the desktop and it runs. And that's really dependent on what you're starting off with. So it's kind of a decision tree and what you can and can't do. More often than not, I've heard repackaging is not done as often, right? It's more for the executable that they didn't give me any switches, there aren't any switches, it doesn't support any switches, there's no way to run this silently. So I'm kind of left with, well, I still have to do it. So by capturing that on a clean machine once, in essence running it one time, capturing that output and turning that into a new MSI-based installer, now by definition it can be run silently. When we do that capture, we don't include any additional dialog boxes or switch or commands or things that you need to, unless you want to put those in. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to recreate what that original installer, did to that clean machine. That's what this MSI will recreate, and redo. But otherwise, it's our package feed module. We provide a lot of command line switches. A lot of vendors do provide that. Not all of them are forthcoming of what all those switches are. So that's where we can save you some time. And in many cases, we've got everything you need. And again, you can take it from there. So I'd say there's different parts of the journey of preparing an application, and each one of them has the potential to be automated. So, and in some applications, I can automate, let's say there's 5 steps, I can automate all 5 of them. Some of them I can only automate 4 of them, or 3 of them, or 2 of them. So it depends on what the vendor package is, what it supports, and what you want to eventually accomplish with that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Ultimately, it depends on what your goal, why you're considering repackaging. If you're repackaging for the sake of repackaging, you're probably not doing it right. But if you're repackaging because you need an ActiveX, you need an AppV package, or you need an MSIX package, and you want to automate that, then leveraging the silent command lines to do that hands-free can save you a bunch of time and get you what you're looking for. But yeah, if you just have an application and want to push it out the door, that same silent command line that you would use to automate repackaging can be used to just do the installation, and then you get the added benefit of it being supported by the vendor. So if there is any conditional logic happening during the installation process, that doesn't get lost in the reverse engineering that happens when you repackage a setup.
Right. In few cases, what I've seen, the reason why somebody would repackage is because they have a certain way of delivering the software or deploying the software on the end machine. They might not necessarily have SCCM, or they might be using group policies, GPOs, for deployments. And in GPOs, the only thing that is supported, or the only package type that is supported today, is MSI. So that could be one of the reasons why I might want to repackage to MSI. And in few cases, it's like, hey, MSI is the standard in our organization, so we would like to have all our packages in the MSI format. So that could be also one reason that I've generally heard why would somebody want to repackage.
Yeah, because when you do an MSI, you basically end up with a whole inventory of all the files associated with every package that you have. You can check them for conflicts. And I think that was probably a key reason early on that people would want to repackage everything, is that this DLL hell challenge was a real thing that we dealt with, that you deploy this application, now you broke another application because it's stepping and competing for shared files. But that happens pretty infrequently these days. So not nearly as key a thing. I think the reason most people sit down with the repackager today is because they can't get a custom installation from the vendor command line that they seek, or they need a different format.
Yeah, where before it was the primary method, and that was the recommendation for Edmund Studio, is if it's not an MSI, then let's get it into an MSI, because, and it still is, the MSI is just a lot easier to work with. But EXEs have come around a bit where some vendors do provide silent switches. You can run it silently. So the case is, well, any advantage I get from getting into an MSI, it may take some time to do that. And so my goal is to get these out the door as quickly as possible. And especially certain industries, again, like healthcare, where some of these apps are like FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration it's certified for that, so they really can't touch it. In many cases, they'll want to take what the vendors provided, and if it supports silent switches, leverage that. But even then sometimes you need to do things. Well, I can run it silently, but I need to do this before the installer. I need to do this after the installer. And that's where we've seen a rise of wrapping of applications and why we've added support for it. So if the silent switches on the installer does what you need it to do, but you still need to do a little bit more before or after, I still need to add this registry key afterwards to add the licensing, or I need to add this config file. And you can't stuff it in the EXE. You can't append to an EXE like you potentially could with an MSI. That's where wrapping can come in to kind of augment that vendor installer to still get what you ultimately need.
And the last factor I think I'd add to this whole thing is the frequency that there's new versions coming out for the application. So if it's something like Chrome or Reader, and there's a new version every other week, a new security update that you have to deal with, then if you're repackaging, then hopefully that would be something that you'd want to automate. Because of the frequency of it. But I think we're getting close to time now. We wanted to tell you about our next session. So I know we just did one last month, but the kind of goal we set for ourselves was to do this every other month. We've chosen rapid packaging as our next topic, but again, your questions can steer that in a different direction. So at a high level, what we'll talk about is, the traditional packaging process, and then ways that could be streamlined to potentially get you, through the process as quickly as possible, and be a little more reactive in testing and validation. And that'll be February 9th. So we see everybody after their Christmas breaks. And then we're going to have a survey, Cindy?
Yes, there is a survey that we will send out to you as soon as we're finished. There's actually a couple of questions that have come in, and we have a few more minutes, if you don't mind. One of the questions is about training. Do we offer training? And I would add in services. Sometimes you might need some additional connections or additional work to have Admin Studio fit best into your environment. We are a partner first company, and one of the partners that we work with predominantly, and they're probably on this call, is Tlux, T-L-U-X, out of England, but they focus on a global virtual atmosphere, of course. So, and we have a few other partners too that can help. So just let us know, and we're very happy to put you in touch with them, or you can also look at Tlux's website. And then there's some other comments that have come through. I think, just giving us some more use cases for MSIX and how others are working with it, or just, there's a person that says that they're new to coding. They need to turn to packaging for some small engineering applications. So, I love what's coming through right now. All of a sudden, we just got a large group of people commenting on this. So, Bob, is there anything that you would say to the audience that they're either fairly new to packaging or they're new to coding, and they're just trying to embark on their journey and trying to decide, is it better to do all this manually or work with automation other than the obvious? Is there just a quick tip that you would offer to them?
Yeah, I mean, kind of the MSIX versus AppV conversation, like at this point in time, the right technology to invest in would be MSIX. MSI, for those who know it, it's non-trivial. It's a database, and there's properties, and there's certain things you can change and can't. And if it's an MSI, you can't repackage it. You have to use a transform, and what changes you can make and where can be complex. There's a lot of rules, a lot of documentation, a lot of restrictions and different ways of going about different things that may not be worth becoming an expert on today. Whereas MSIX, it's a consistent experience, and it's going to be considerably simpler to wrap your head around and get started with. And like I said, if the application that you're working with isn't behaving well in MSIX, you may have to revert back. But I would almost, unless you have to repackage to MSI, where a vendor silent command line can do the job, I think, the best practice at this stage would be to leverage that when possible. Just because it's better supported by the vendor, it's better for updates. Because I mean, that's most of the deployments that you do outside of maybe a Windows upgrade are going to be updates to existing products, and you want the logic of that installer and the things it might want to do to update settings to the application from one version to the next, and these type of things. And most of the customization needs really happen on the initial deployment. Once the application's out there, usually an installer will just replace the files of the old one, but retain the settings and the shortcuts and the customizations you put in place most of the time. It is kind of still a puzzle, and every application has a different answer. So there's some level of investigation required to understand your options, which of course we're trying to address in Admin Studio as best we can by suggesting command lines. Even if you don't have package, the package feed module where we have researched tested command lines, Admin Studio does have the inherent capability that when you add a setup, we'll look at the technology used to create the setup and recommend possible command line parameters. So if it was nsys or wise or install shield or whatever it was created with, by identifying that, we know what command line properties are inherently supported and are likely to work to save a little bit of time. But there's if you're getting started, I would definitely learn what I could about MSIX. It might seem a little complex, but I think it's going to be one of those things that works pretty easy and works well, except when it doesn't. And then, whether you choose AppV or MSI, when things go poorly and you have to investigate and troubleshoot, none of them are easy. That's why there's so many people on here today that have made a career out of it, because it's not an easy thing and it requires expertise and time. But the more problems you run into and overcome, the better a packager you become.
Cool, Bob. I think time for one final question coming from Anonymous. Are there any limitations for file size when creating complex engineering MSIX captures?
MSIX specifically. Are you aware, Kieran?
Yes, MSIs have a standard limitation of 2 gigabits. So MSI file cannot be bigger than 2 gigabytes or 2 gigs, right? But for MSIX, I'm not aware of any limitation.
Yeah, I was going to say the for MSI, it's the cab file specifically. So if you want a single compressed MSI with its payload, all the files that you're going to actually install, all self-contained, then the cab files are a 2 gig limit. Otherwise, those have to be, they're kind of like, cabs are almost like zip files, where if you go beyond 2 gigs, you can't put more than that in there, so that you're going to have it's called an uncompressed, or the payload's external from the main MSI installer. But to Kieran's point, I don't think there is a limit with MSIX. It's likely, since it's designed to work in a 64-bit world, we're probably talking, I imagine there is some limit, but we're probably talking in peta or exabytes. So it's one of those, it's practically unlimited, where there's definitely a limitation, especially if you're large engineering or other complex software that can get multi-gig in size. Certainly MSIs have a size limit from there for the cab files that anyway.
The binary is more of a stream, right? So even when it's doing a deployment, it doesn't copy all the files down the way an MSI or a typical install would. It actually looks to see what you have and gets the new parts of the file that you don't already have. And if the file already exists, it doesn't bring it down at all. It just references the one that you already have. So yeah, it's very, very granular in how it handles files. That gives it some definite benefits there.
And it's on the byte level too, right? So it's on a it's that efficient that it's looking at a kind of oh, you already have these bytes on your machine, so I don't have to recopy them down. So ultimately, if you've got the same 3 different applications from the same vendor, and they likely probably use the same libraries and things, if they're all in MSIX, it'll actually share that same group of bytes that make up that library or whatever it is, and not have to recopy them and have 3 different instances of it.
Yeah.
So I am going to break in. We have 1 minute to go, and I think we're definitely at time. So really great session, very interactive with the audience. Thank you so much for attending. Like I said before, we will send out a survey to get your feedback and also additional ideas for topics for future sessions. Thanks again. Have a great day. Bye-bye.